So just to introduce the LAPC, the London Alternative Photography Collective was founded by myself in 2013 and has grown from a small group of analog and alternative photography practitioners to a collective which produces large-scale symposiums, exhibitions, and workshops. The collective is currently directed by myself and Hannah Fletcher and supported by project managers Constanza Izaza Martinez, Katrina Stamatopoulos, Martha Gray and Diego Valente, as well as Sophie Sherwood. Recent symbiosis exhibitions that we've had have been curated by myself, Kai Lewis and Harry Harrison. So the LAPC is an open collective which anyone can inform and work within. Open to artists who have ideas for projects, LAPC has always been about promoting the accessibility and creative possibilities of analog and experimental photographers. So that happens in lots of different ways, as I mentioned, with exhibitions, talks, workshops, demonstrations, and we're always interested in collaborating. I'm just going to introduce Martha, who has co-curated this talk with the Linnean Society of London. So Martha Gray is a London-based artist and curator who has worked with alternative processes for the past 7 years. Her practice explores personal relationships to the natural through experimental photographic processes with ongoing research into the use of cyanotype as a contemporary method. She did the MA Art and Science at Central St Martin's and a BA Photography at Camberwell College of Art. And she also uses different alternative photographic processes in response to the themes of sustainability, feminism, and the natural world. Gray is an editor for the online platform Alternative Processes, and as I mentioned before, she's a project leader for the LAPC. Martha, did you want to wave?
Hi, thanks for coming, everyone.
So now to the introduction for our first speaker. Dianne Bos turns her own herbarium into a photo album by using sunlight to create images on plants. The resulting chlorophyll prints are made using the natural chemistry of living plants, the ultimate sustainable photographic process. The image Bos has chosen to print into the leaves reflect the many worlds that plants sustain, whilst also hinting that there might be sci-fi elements at play. These images are just as fragile and ephemeral as specific life forms may be when confronted with the abrupt ecosystem change. In this lecture, Bos will discuss the discoveries and reflections prompted by this photographic collaboration with nature. She's an internationally exhibiting artist based in Canada and France, has evolved various thematic bodies of work and merged technical innovations to create new visual hybrids. Her innovative use of pinhole, camera obscura, installation, and alternative photography techniques explore the world around us. She says, the excitement for me lies not in reproducing something I can see, but in revealing the imperceptible and maybe only the imagined, using the physics of light and time and darkroom. Over to you, Dianne.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to thank the Linnean Society of London and, of course, you guys at the London Alternative Photography Collective for inviting me to participate in this lecture series. And your collective has it kind of saved me during COVID, and I'll get back to talking about that. But it opened, obviously, all of us ended up going into the online world for a year or so. And if it wasn't for some of these different websites and talks and various workshops that people had, I think maybe I would have gone crazy, and probably a lot of people out there feel the same. So great to see you all. Actually, I see none of you, which is fine. Feel a little less nervous. I'm really stuffed up. I've got a bad cold, but thankfully, because of this technology, you are in no danger. I am going to start this talk by going back in time and giving you kind of a synopsis of what I've been doing photographically for the last 40 years. And that sounds like maybe you're going to be here all night, but I will try and do that in about 10 minutes and then get to the chlorophyll work. But this is a photo of me, and in fact, that alley of trees is just around the corner from where I am right now. Beautiful spot. And that's a pinhole camera on my head, which in fact has a movie camera in it, and I'm doing a pinhole movie. So what I've done talks and workshops all over the world on pinhole photography. And one of the images I'd like to start with is this one of this grotto in Italy, made around 1600, Villa Aldobrandini. It's just south of Rome in place Frascati. And it's interesting on all sorts of levels. It's this amazing thing that was made in the garden. And at that time, if you can imagine, when there's no other kinds of entertainment except for maybe the church, these kind of follies that they had in gardens were quite amazing. And so this one combining kind of this sculpture and garden and so on. But the thing I love about it is this dappled light. And dappled light is, in fact, little projections of the sun on the ground. So if you were under a tree during a solar eclipse, all those circles of light would, in fact, be, you would see them eclipsing. And what's cool is the tree is kind of the first camera. What people were seeing is the fact that you get the leaves are all bunched together, but you'll get these triangular openings through the leaves. And because light is coming from the sun and traveling in a straight line, not only is it causing photosynthesis on the plant, but you're getting a projection of the sun, which is, the most important thing to plants and probably to us as well. So this knowledge was around for, as Aristotle is writing about it, obviously for many centuries. In the last millennium, or in this millennium, people started, no, it's the last one, getting interested in kind of researching more the camera obscura, what was happening with it. People were recreating these environments that you could go into where light would project in. And of course, if you've seen that David Hockney film about the secret of the masters, and people like Vermeer probably used a camera obscura to paint from, as well as Caravaggio, many different artists. So here's another. I just love these old engravings of that device for making images. And you'll see, and further along with my work, I've kind of elaborated on these kind of camera obscura rooms. So pinhole, I got really interested in pinhole photography after graduating from art college. I went to University of Mount Allison University in New Brunswick, which is on the east coast of Canada, and I majored in photography and not photography, majored in painting and sculpture. But my sculpture were little boxes, and I created these little dioramas. And thanks to a professor that just retired from there, Thaddeus Halonia, a really interesting photographer, he was teaching the students with the pinhole camera. Not many people were doing that. You would get it in physics class, maybe at school. So when I graduated, I got this job at this art gallery, which luckily no one came into. So I was able to make a darkroom in the basement and do my work. That's just a hint to anybody looking for jobs after graduating. Look for a place where nobody is, and you can do your own work there. Anyways, this was my first pinhole photograph in Gerlach Gardens, and I just had my hair stood on end when I did it. Luckily, the first one turned out because I would need, instant gratification. So this one worked. It was about a 15-minute exposure in this garden. There was like fog and wind, and it was this passage of time. And I am totally hooked on that. So you can tell, 1979, I'm still making pinhole photographs. I took a break in the 80s because, like a lot of people who went to art school, I started a band. And through the 80s, it was kind of went from punk to new wave, and eventually a group called Perfect World. And Perfect World, again, talked about the environment. We had a couple songs with videos. If you go to my website, you can see me with 80s hair. But the first one was called Have a Good Look, and it explored the landscape, industrial farming. It talked about how all these things weren't great for the environment. Obviously we really got our message across because, the earth has really cleaned up since then, and I'm being super sarcastic. So after getting kind of turned off of the whole music business, which took about 10 years, I was actually making pinhole photographs through that whole time period, but it was great. It kept me sane. I started making a portable pinhole box because if you know pinhole cameras and you make them, you can only take one photo at a time. And so I had this little cardboard box and I started photographing all over Europe and, did this image on top of, obviously Notre Dame. And in fact, and it just shows you, I mean, I made this out of a cardboard box and this has been on it's not record cover, book covers. It was a big ad campaign for UPS. In fact, as a stock photo, it was very successful. And it's weird because I don't think the artistic directors that were interested in it knew that it was made with a cardboard box. So I put that one in on purpose for you guys in London. And the nice thing about a pinhole camera is it has infinite depth of field. So I had it propped up on a book of London, and the type of London is in the same amount of focus as Big Ben in the distance. And so you can you can do some really interesting things. I traveled around for a while. I photographed things that were photographed thousands of times every day by people. Just because it had this kind of antique look, and also they were passages of time like that. The image on the bottom there of Chichen Itza in Mexico, there would have been 100 tourists in front of me who just disappeared because of this exposure was 3 minutes long. The one on the beach is that's the only time people show up because they're not moving very much. But I was really interested in seeing kind of how that camera looked at the modern environment. So continuing kind of to explore how cameras work and how light works, I started making these multi-aperture cameras, these what I call galaxy cameras. And so you can see a plate in the background there for one of the large cameras, and then the one up front is one that takes 4x5 negatives. And these are the kind of images I did. So that is a photograph of one candle in one instant, but it's because each pinhole worked as a lens, basically. And I had a star chart that was the Milky Way. So it's an actual kind of version of the Milky Way by starlight, by candlelight. And yeah, got some interesting effects with that. This is a self-portrait of me on TV talking about making these cameras, and froze the image on TV and used this multi-aperture camera to photograph myself. And I'm not going to go into too many details here, but then it was such a cool thing when I was looking at how these images would project onto paper, I went, oh, I want to make environments that people can walk into and see the same thing I did. So I started making these garden shed camera obscura projection devices. So this is one of the first ones I did. This is one I did more recently for a museum in Hamilton, Ontario. And you can see me pointing at the various holes in the back of it, which are all in the pattern of what you would see the stars if you could see stars in daylight. And in this case, then this is me inside that structure. So what you get are multiple projections from outside. So that's my husband standing outside of it. And if a bus went by, of course, you saw moving images. And it's amazing how many people thought this was working using power and electricity. This is just sunlight, which is starlight. And very, very simple, but it just blew people away. And the other funny thing people said when they would look at this is when they were in the devices, they go, how come it's not in black and white? And it's kind of a funny thing. Like, I don't know why, if people think it's kind of an old device, that it would be in black and white. Anyways, that's just one of the star shed things. Another thing I did, and this kind of relates to the herbarium, is I started carving old books into cameras, and I would photograph things related to that book. So I carved out basically this hole in the book. There's a pinhole in the front of the book that you can kind of see on the left-hand side. This one is all on a botanical book, a French book, and inside of it was this pressed violet flower, and it was kind of neat to find that. And then what I did was I photographed trees and so on with the book. And what happens is light seeps in through the pages of the book. It's not light proof, and you get text from the book in with the actual photo of what you're taking. So it's this combination of photogram, pinhole photo, kind of cool multi-purpose thing. Did one on carved up a book on Rome, walked around Rome and photographed took one photo every day of one of the monuments, architectural monuments in Rome. So then, and getting closer to talking about what I'm going to be talking about, in 2000, I was invited by the Whyte Museum, which is the venue the museum that hosted the herbarium show. I was invited. I was living in Ontario then, and what they sponsored every year were these expeditions to go into the Rocky Mountains. And normally they were painters and drawers, but this year they had invited photographers. So got to go hiking up into underneath these glaciers, which unfortunately are probably that one in particular is almost gone. I was right at the base of it. But what's cool again with that strange way that pinhole cameras work. Oh yeah, the other thing is I got this camera called the Zero, which is a pinhole camera, but it takes color. You can put film in it, so you can actually take 12 pictures instead of one. All you guys with, iPhone cameras and so on are going, what? Take one picture? I think everybody should only take one picture a day, so you take one good picture. Anyways, was set up on the ground underneath just by this tree. And to give you an idea of the perspective, that tree is probably 12 inches tall. It's a little tiny, tiny tree with this, in the Rocky Mountains underneath this glacier is right behind me. So at first, because I had been just photographing in urban environments, I wondered, what am I going to do in the natural environment? And it was amazing. So I would put the camera, like the other thing is there's no viewfinder, right? So I'm just putting the camera down and it takes a photo. But after all these years, I kind of know what it's going to be seeing. But this, like, again, this little berry under a tree, I had the camera sitting on the moss on the forest floor. It was probably, God, I don't know, 5 or more minute exposure. That little plant was moving, and you just get this richness. There's another thing that happens with film when it's overexposed like this, which is not supposed to be used in that way. With a pinhole camera, it gets really rich, and the color just gets just super saturated. There's one more recently on a lake, a frozen lake, again near Banff. And I was sitting on the ice, and there was actually all these bubbles in the ice. The ice was quite thick, and it was just this amazing kind of universe under the ice. And the other thing with pinhole cameras, you often get this kind of refraction around because the pinhole is made out of metal, the light suddenly bounces off it, and you get these neat rainbows. So then later, so now I'm like totally into doing these color pinholes. For 20 years, I was really happy with black and white. I started photographing these interiors, thinking of artists like Vermeer working by windows and so on. So I went to a lot of interesting places. This is where I taught some photography pinhole courses in this town in Italy. But this is it looks like a stage set, but that light on the ground coming in through the window is slowly moving during this exposure. This is one in a chateau nearby. And that horse actually moved from being almost right in front of the chateau to midway. And then if you look on the right side, you see it's the back end of the animals as it's gotten closer and closer to me, but only where it stayed for a longer period of time. But I love that because that's more like a decisive moment is not the way I see the world, like frozen in time. So these kind of images really interested me. And again, here you see like the Seine and the way the water, things like water get very flat looking because all the waves disappear. And then I had this moment of going up to northern France. A Canadian friend of mine was living up there, and she said, "Oh, as a Canadian, you need to go to this Vimy Ridge. This is where in the First World War, and we just had Remembrance Day, so it was on top of mind right now. We had they always have a service in these villages in France, and that was one of the things that made me think about the First World War. You know, in Canada, we do have monuments in each village of people who also, you know, were killed during the war, soldiers that went abroad. And my uncle was one of them, but that's for the Second World War. The First World War, I had less information with. And I went up to Vimy Ridge and just seeing that landscape, you know, at first it looked so amazing because of all these divots, and it was almost like this Japanese garden, and you know, it's all kind of mowed down by sheep and so on. But you realize it's all from bombs and underground mines and so on that created this landscape. And it's a landscape you can't walk in because it still has potentially active ammunition in the ground. I mean, there's still, they have to go and, you know, stuff's dug up in farmers' fields all the time. So I made kind of in my mind, I said, I'm going to go up there 100 years after when the First World War ends or begins, and I want to do a series of photos. So I got the idea in 2003, and it took not 100 years later, but 14 years later or less to put together this exhibition of images from France and Flanders Fields and Belgium and so on. Places where Canadian in particular were big battlefields and important battlefields. And that show had an opening in Paris in 2017, which was at the Canadian Cultural Center, which was pretty awesome for me. So these are some of the images that were in that show. And this is when I first started using other materials in the darkroom. So I'm printing traditionally in a darkroom, got an enlarger, got the negative, pinhole negative in there, projecting it on, you know, on the photo paper. But what I'm doing is putting things between that light and that photo paper. And so if you've made photograms before, if any of you have done stuff in a dark room, you know that you can put objects on a paper, shine a flashlight, or just turn the lights on, and you'll get a silhouette of those objects. So what I was playing with was objects that to me related to that landscape. And, you know, the idea of these kind of flowers falling from the heavens or maybe being blown up from the ground. There were these little daisies all on the ground there, and creating this other kind of poetic dimension to this landscape. The obvious one, if people know, is the poppies in Flanders Fields, famous poem written by a Canadian doctor that was there and died during the war. This is in Plogstreet, Belgium. And so in this case, it's a pinhole photo of the poppies. And then what I did was drop stones onto the photo as I was exposing the photo paper. And it took some experimentation. This was really another place this is near the Somme, Newfoundland, which you know is an island off of Canada. Was a very tragic site where a whole battalion, which basically was all the men in the village were, you know, signed up and were in the same battalion, and almost all of them were killed on the site. One thing, if you notice, there's stones on it, and these are the trenches there, but there's one that's in the shape of the bullet, and that is a bullet. There was a lot of people come from England, and they come with metal detectors, and they go in these fields when they're being plowed, and they collect artifacts. And this guy asked me what I was doing, and he gave me this bullet. And I said I will include it in a photo of this site. So it was kind of amazing. And this is another one with the pinhole camera on the ground, looking up through the plants, because thinking about what happened to men on the battlefield is, what was the last thing they looked at? Were they looking up at trees? Were they looking at the stars? Were they looking at clouds? You know, so putting this kind of galaxy in above it was symbolic of perhaps these last visions. So that work and this kind of incorporating objects into the image through the darkroom process then turned to the last body of work I did before the chlorophyll work. And I started photographing in these botanical gardens, but also different landscapes in Canada and in Europe and so on, looking at the biodiversity of those landscapes, but also wanting to kind of express in the images these invisible things that happen around us with plants. The fact that plants are putting this oxygen in the air. If we didn't exist, I mean, we don't we wouldn't exist if it wasn't. Plants are the first things. We survive on plants. Where plants are our ancestors. So, you know, these kind of, I had all these different glass beads to kind of look at these and ordinarily invisible things like the plant photosynthesis, putting oxygen in the air, pollen, all the different things that are there. And I went to visit one of the oldest botanical gardens in probably, I guess, in the world. Maybe there's some in China that are older, but this in Europe is the Ordo Botanico di Padova, and that's near, if you're ever going to Venice, it's a good place to stop. It has this amazing biodiversity garden. This is the new part of the garden. It looks, you can see that building on the left-hand side. It feels like you're in a Star Trek episode. You know, you should be walking around in a white suit and, you know, spaceships in it, because it's this weird kind of preservation of plants. But then in the background, you see these really ancient buildings and churches, and then this old part of the garden. You know, you can wander through. So you're going through hundreds of years of kind of the way people look at natural, you know, at plants and plant life. So this is one of the ponds. This is an interior pond that had those terrific giant water lilies. I think they're called Victorian water lilies. And again, these are all pinhole images. And I started going to other botanical gardens. This is one in Spain. And again, this is a cactus flower. These flowers are probably not even an inch in diameter. So my camera was stuck right in the flowers when I was photographing it. And then these other bubbles, other objects were added in as I was printing it. But each print ends up being one of a kind. And I also then used leaves that I collected at the sites and then had them printed into the print as I'm doing. So I put these ferns on top of the image as I was printing it in the darkroom. So, this is one up in the Pyrenees here, fall crocus, which is about this time. And this is where I grew up, Southern Ontario. And so I had leaves, maple leaves, tulip tree leaves, and this is a real deciduous forest there. So that takes me to this work. And it feels like a jump, but it's not. I'm invited back by the Whyte Museum in the Rockies. There's a group of us that proposed a show called Redesigning Paradise. And the four of us all worked looking at nature, really interested in archives and doing work related to that. And so this is an exterior view of the Whyte Museum. And to just give you a sense of where it is in the world, it's way over there, right on the Rocky Mountains. And I put this in because a lot of you, if you're in Canada, you know about the land acknowledgement that it is done now before events, just acknowledging the fact that this land was someone else's before all the settlers moved in. And I thought it was important to include that in this slideshow as well, because a lot of my work come from there. But this gives you an idea of the many tribes that were living in that area and still live in that area. And just sort of, Queen Victoria signs a treaty in 1877 and on it goes. So this museum was started by Peter and Catherine Robb Whyte. So they started, they had a really good relationship with Indigenous people from there. And they do a lot of exhibitions involving the local community as well. So here's a few, just to give you a background into the museum. These are the archival. One of the things they have are just collecting stuff from Rocky Mountain. So when I was invited on that expedition, it was to make work that they would then have that, looked at interpretations of the mountains and mountain culture. And so there's just, amazing photo library, objects from mountain climbing to, the Indigenous people, artifacts, maps, books about mountain climbing, incredible stuff. So when we were invited to have this exhibition, we really, really wanted to include some of the objects and some of the ideas. So Sarah Fuller and I, who was in the show as well, got really interested in going to the archive area, and we had gone there before. And I got really interested in all these herbariums. And so they had been collecting these herbariums from people who had visited that area 100 years ago. This one, this is like one piece from 1911. But in their archives, I mean, they're still in okay shape. I mean, unfortunately, I couldn't put the actual ones in the show because they are super, super fragile after 100 years. But it was interesting to see them and to kind of include them in a way. So here are some of the other things. There's this great scrapbook by a young person, and this was, I think it's from the 60s or something, grade 6, age 11, collecting flowers in the Yukon. And there's one of the traditional flower presses that they had in the collection as well. And so looking through it, I got really interested in all of McDonnell Allen Fawn's. And so there's the first page of her herbarium collection. She said, these flowers collected in Banff area in 1924. It's the anniversary of that. Trips taken with Dr. Sampson, curator of the Banff Museum, Dr. Silver Dowling, now keeping, botanist from Alberta University, and Harriet Inkstetter, nearly all, I think, now something pressed well under canvas with the help above of these friends. So she had these plant experts with her while hiking. I think it's funny, her hiking trousers are in their collection as well. So there's 94 pages of these plants, and they're still, looking pretty good. Here are some examples of them. It's funny, she's written Himalaya on the bottom, if anybody knows why, because she found these in the Banff Valley, but I don't know, maybe the same. It seems it's a Potenella. I mean, there are versions, obviously, of all these plants in other places, but I'm not sure why that was written there. And it's really interesting, the blue on that plant, it's still retained that really vivid blue. Beautiful. Even that one there with the really fuzzy stuff. So the show was called Redesigning Paradise, and there's the 4 artists, Marianne Barkhouse, myself, Sarah Fuller, and Penelope Stewart. And we pitched this show to them, and it was this is one of the things that came again out of COVID. A lot of us, couldn't meet and talk to other artists like we used to, or go, on residencies and so on. And the 4 of us had met and done things in different parts of the world for many years. So we were starting to do Zoom talks, and and we just thought, oh, it would be really nice to be able to do. We had never had a show with the 4 of us together, so we started looking at what that show would be. And I talked to the Whyte Museum, and they were keen to do it. So we did a proposal, and we produced this work, and so that. As the blurb there said, we offer a variety of cultural perspectives that look at flora, fauna, and weather patterns of the foothill mountain and other ecosystems, and also looking at the archives. So there's the 4 of us. You can tell we have a lot of fun when we're together. And the banners that you see there that are cyanotype, and they are using actual plant materials and so on, that's Marianne Barkhouse's work. And she's standing on the right-hand side there. Beautiful work. Leading up to that, and I had been starting to see, and thanks to the London Society, the photography, just these really interesting things online. And I took this pelargonium geranium printing workshop with Alice. And, I just thought this printing actually on the leaf, but it's actually printing in the leaf, was really kind of a cool process. Now, the one that she was teaching was a little more complex. It actually didn't happen with sunlight. It happened with getting a UV light inside. Worked best on geranium leaves, but you got interesting effects, but it was kind of chancy. So I started looking at other chlorophyll printing techniques, and I ended up just sort of approaching it really simply. I started making these stencils. The first stencil I did was this sun, And I did it on paper, and I oiled the paper so it would be transparent. And I actually got this image, which was on like a morning glory leaf. And you're probably confused by that. The image is in the leaf, and the stencils behind it. I just put those together for the purposes of this talk. But the process is really, really simple. If you put a stencil and you're blocking the light from on the plant, the plant, the chlorophyll stays green, whereas the sun, if it's too intense on the other parts that aren't blocked, really starts bleaching out the chloroplast. And I found in this one plant book that I had, it explained in it. It was really funny. This is a 100-year-old book, but this Lumiere. So it's on a beet leaf, and it shows them putting a metal stencil on the leaf to block the light, but in that way making those words appear on the leaf. And so it was interesting to put the process of making a chlorophyll print while making a chlorophyll print on the leaf. So it was, I kind of liked it. So then it's like, what do you do? I saw a lot of people, really interesting work, and most people are doing stuff that relates to the environment where those leaves come from. And that makes a lot of sense. I was looking at, what does the leaf, like, what's important to the leaf? Looking at it, the actual structure of it, looking at, the pollen from it, looking at its seeds. And so I was thinking of actually printing, into the leaf, those things again that are normally invisible to us. So that's the plant book that I was using and getting a lot of the images from. And my husband said, explain that I'm not printing onto the leaf. There's no ink. It's not running through a press. It's nothing. The process is in the leaf. So it's just putting a stencil on the leaf, and the image is on the leaf. And here's my dark room. No, it's my sunroom and my studio. This is an amazing thing. Like, if like you're growing your material, like basically that you're going to be printing on. I had like a crazy nasturtium patch. And I could get my tomatoes ripened at the same time. So it was like win-win. So normally, because where I am in France, the exposures were in the summer are really fast. In fact, sometimes I would just overdo it. I was kind of roasting them. So you had to be really careful. And each leaf has almost like a different way of dealing with the light. I'm going to just click on this guy and see. There we go. This is just checking the clock here. Oh, man. Okay. So that's some of the leaves that I had, and they're getting the imprint on them. And that's my little friends that come and check out. I don't know what, they're so interested in it. So then it's like, what now? How do you display these? These are so ephemeral. They're so fragile. I was pressing them in books on plants. I started looking at them in relation to the book they were in. Again, it kind of refers back to the Pinhole work I was doing with books, and photographing those pages and going, does this work? This is kind of interesting. Just kind of seeing them in these different, you're getting, like, this is pretty new work for me. So you're in the early stages of how these things develop into shows. Again, even looking at what images work on what leaves and so on. The one on the left, is the leaf is not, it's just barely there, but I like seeing those cells in that. And the nasturtiums kind of get dark. These are a lot of the different leaves. You might be wondering, what did I use? So I was experimenting stuff. The trees are generally, because they're a tougher leaf and less, it seems like the leaves that are, you have to get this balance of whether they're a fragile leaf or a really hardy leaf. The Judas tree is interesting because it is like it dries like it's like almost like it's a waxed leaf. And I actually got interesting images in it. The elder, and you know, you guys, I know there's people that are going, that's not a hazelnut leaf. I'm not sure what it was. I think I'm confused between the elder and the hazelnut, which are kind of similar. The laurel is really hard to print on. You can barely see eyes on it. The elderberry actually works quite well. I did some little genetic testing on it there. It's quite obvious. And the dandelion, I think it reminds me of Guardians of the Galaxies. Isn't it like, yeah, anyways, if any of you like sci-fi. Nasturtiums and Italian arum are like the prize winners for doing good chlorophyll prints. And I really like the arum because you can get this kind of vignetting on the leaf. So again, looking at what things like, you know, then I was thinking insects, like the insects and you know, they live off of plants. They have such a relationship to so many plants, you know, printing them into the leaf. And then, you know, looking at the smallest thing to the very largest thing, you know, like Saturn in the universe. I'm just gonna get this guy going. But they're so like, this is trying to get, I mean, my favorite way to view these is to hold them in a window and see the light come through them. That would be an impossible show to have. So then it was like, what about us? You know, we live because of plants. And at the same time, we're kind of one of the, you know, the destroyer of the natural world. So like a lot of insects are. So it's kind of having, you know, combining, you know, my face and my eye with this insect world. The strange thing, so the pair of eyes on that one on the right-hand side, there is a small black dot. That's it's a tick. I keep thinking it's on my head. No, it's on the leaf's head, but it got pressed into the book along with the leaf. So be careful when you're doing this sort of stuff. Again, here are some different ones using and then and in the intro talking about sort of science fiction-y, that's, you know, I feel like that's where these ones are going. Then you look at, you know, what all the things that are extinct in the world, and you think, you know, the great auk, the dodo bird, you know, they're amazing creatures that you know, have disappeared in the last couple hundred years. Maybe they should be, you know, memorialized on a leaf. Weather patterns, the weather and its effect on plants. So then I started looking at weather patterns in these old books and printing them on these nasturtium leaves. And it was really interesting what happens with some of the nasturtium leaves. If you see that one on the right, there's sections of the leaf that don't change color. And I don't know why that happens, but it's almost like a landscape where you've got fields and some of them are plowed, some are green, some are dark. It worked in I mean, if you work with pinhole cameras, you know, you have to love chance. Swiss chard I just started working with, and it's awesome. It has it's really meaty. It really takes images in an interesting way. And I started loving, like at first I was looking for perfect leaves, but I kind of love it when they're more deteriorated like these ones, and they have holes and these things that kind of work with the images. They're like, you know, papyrus. I mean, I feel like some of these are like things that you've dug out of you know, a tomb. Maybe people, you know, like I'm thinking people may have put images, not, you know, stencils, but they could have done things on leaves. I mean, it's just something that disappears. So this is the exhibition. That's how I showed it. I kind of put them under glass domes like you know, you see in museums. I have my books there and the leaves sort of scattered around. There's the actual herbarium antique ones from the museum are in the case as well, but copies of them because the real ones are quite fragile. But I love these little domes, IKEA. But they were, and the leaves, once they're dry, they're quite stiff, and they held up well in that. So there's just gives you. And the other work is from the the biodiversity, and that's Sarah Fuller's work as one of the pieces you see there. So this is the installation. And they had these backlit things. So one of the things is the leaves look amazing, as I was saying, when you hold them up to light. So the four small ones there, I think there were five, actually have the real leaves in them that are backlit. And I wondered whether they would stay, you would see the image, like whether it would start disappearing as the exhibition went on. But they did. I mean, they lost some of the green. They went to this kind of nice goldy brown. But I mean, the image is still there. It still exists. The big works on that you see on the side, yeah, you know what? I love the dodo. I could just do dodos all the time, I think. This is one of the other panels. It looks like those leaves, like the scan on a light table and then blowing them up large. And these are the kind of panels that they might have in a, a streetcar stop or somewhere. It worked really well so obviously they're reproductions of the leaves. I scanned them and then blew them up. There's the lovely dodo again. There's the other work, Marianne Barkhouse piece on the wall there, which are beautiful tapestries with plants surrounding scenes that she kind of invented, a mix of European and North American indigenous life. Gorgeous work. If you go to their website, you can probably, any of the guys' website, you can see that work. So these are those panels. Up individually. And so I picked certain groupings depending on how they kind of work together. This one was just hands and different leaves and that kind of texture. One of the neat things is it's like pixelation. It's like pixelation in a digital photograph, how the little chloroplasts capture or don't, the either gets burned out. I thought it was so interesting when I was looking at them up close is how it ended up looking mechanical in a way. This is how fragile they are. But again, here is just an example of, when I would peel the stencils off them and then hold them up to the light. That was kind of my favorite moment. And then the veins are so ecstatic. So recently I've started looking at these old architectural drawings. This is from books that I collected again here that are over 100 years old, and looking at the patterns in nature and how, well, obviously architecture is often copying nature. If you look at Carl Blosfeld, I have a book of his here, and how he did all these design photos of plants, which were then turned into wrought iron and so on. But if you look at just even back to the Romans, where they used acanthus on the columns and so on. So it was interesting to kind of pick these different buildings and then lay the leaf on it, so the kind of vein and the building structure worked, and that kind of like the cell structure of the plant and looking at this kind of drawn building structure. Oh, this will give you an idea of how those things come off. So that's the stencil underneath. Isn't this amazing? It's like, this also is the worst part, because sometimes the whole leaf can fall apart. But that is how I'm getting, so the stencil was on it, shone light, and this is when I take it in and expose it, and that's that print on my hand. It's just like skin at that point. So here's some more architectural ones. Been doing some of the windows in buildings here. This is the house I'm living in. You can see I'm exposing it in the window there at the bottom, and that window is the window on the leaf. So it's yeah. And then having again, taking old engravings and having these stories on leaves, and it translated so well on that kind of texture. It's two different, so the arum and the nasturtiums. And this ties into my interest in astronomy and stars and light. This is a whole old engraving of how different ways that light works from a really old book. And I just like the holes and everything in it. It's and then the latest thing I've been doing is photographing trees, making a stencil of the trees, and then putting them on plants because of the way the stem of the plant comes up and the veins in the leaf, it mirrors exactly the veins of the tree structure. And I did a poetry piece with my husband, who's an English prof and taught poetry. And there's fragments of famous poems that have to do with plants and gardens on there. So if you're clever, you can figure out which one. Except at the bottom here, it says you're soaking in it, which was a Palmolive commercial in Canada. There's this green liquid that you do your dishes in. And this is now just to show you how I'm mounting it. So I've scanned it, I've made a digital print and blown the image up. And this is how just recently I've started showing the work. Also, it's been shown in basically mural form in a couple of venues. So this is in Ottawa. It's part of a street art project. And this has been up for 2 years on the street. So it's a installation there, which was cool. I went and saw it last month. And then also in Ottawa, and this was a collaboration between the Agricultural Museum and SPOW, who are a really great photography gallery in Ottawa. They did the show, which gathered a couple artists together that work with plants and as part of their work. So there's the blurb up above. But it's just, I like these kind of venues when I like this crossover of science and art, and this is what you're doing, with right now with the Linnean, combining with the photography people and looking at these crossovers. Photography has always been, I think, I was torn between being going into science and going into art, and I thought, I can do science as a hobby. And I know a lot of other people think it the opposite way, but it's worked out really well. So these were a couple of my pieces as part of that. So there's the eye on that leaf and the dragonfly. And that is it. And I think that's probably when you wanted me to wrap up. So now I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Okay, you
Yeah,
take
just
control.
I'm here. Thank you so much for that, Diane. That was truly amazing, and what a visual treat. I did love the vignetting on the Arum, I must say. That was my favorite. I was wondering if you ever looked into, the proportion of pigments in each species and whether that has an impact on how the printing happens.
Yeah, I think that's why some of the leaves from deciduous trees, I think the pigment in them, because I think those leaves are on a tree for months and months, where a lot of these other plants, like a nasturtium, has a shorter growing period. I think the leaf trees are hardier and have, obviously the pigments change color in the fall due to a bunch of different reasons. But yeah, like a maple leaf just doesn't work, and an oak leaf, I didn't have, any luck. I was surprised to have the ones that did, but you can see that it's almost, it's like a grainier photograph, right? And I'm sure the structure of the leaf, even the chloroplasts and everything, are different in those leaves than in maybe a nasturtium. Nasturtium must have the finest because you can get, and then the arum too. I can get like a grayscale happening in that. And some of them I would only get, basically an outline, like black and white. So yeah, it's kind of, if I, spend a couple more years on it, get into it more, you can probably, and then, there's probably people who are part of your society that know exactly why that's happening. And they can contact me. Go to my, I'd love to know more about this.
Yeah, it would be a science project. You were showing the herbarium samples, the specimens, and we also have a delphinium, which is blue, and it is one of the specimens. Even today, it keeps the color blue.
And
for
how
some
old
reason.
is it?
Oh gosh, I did take a screenshot of it. I can tell you in a little bit. I'll just
But
look
yeah,
at it.
because you have things that are hundreds of years old,
Yeah,
right? And those
yeah.
leaves are still, yeah, it's one of the things I think, if I had time and maybe people are interested, is doing ephemeral work like this, because anthotypes are the same thing where they fade over time when you're using plant materials. So, do you put them in there's Da Vinci drawings that have to be, looked at in dark rooms. You pull a curtain back or you open a little door and stuff. They need special viewing conditions. Or do we just let go of it and say, yeah, this is only going to last 10 years, 50 years, 100 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a discussion. I can't remember whether the alternative photography people did that, but it was a museum talking about like an art gallery. How would they collect this work of mine? When the whole reason for museums and art galleries are to preserve things, and they have the climate control and all that, yet you've made work that's almost impossible to preserve. But when I was reading about the stuff that you have in your collection, I realized, no, these plants can last a really long time.
Yeah, they can. Or maybe, they'll all disappear with the end of the world. But let me get to
Yeah.
the questions. There's a lot. So let me see how
Okay.
many we can get through.
All right.
Jane, I'll try to put a few questions together which sound similar to me. Um, Jane asked, did you develop your color pinhole prints or just the black and white?
I've just started developing the color myself in the last couple of years because it got so hard to find people that could develop color film. So the great thing in Alberta, there was a company in just this guy in a small village south of Calgary who, now Sarah, you got to send a message to this thing because I've forgotten his name. But he is selling this developer for black and white too, and it's all environmentally sound too. He's using materials and stuff that don't, in theory, aren't going to be dangerous when you put them down the drain. And it's trickier. Colors, if you've developed color, it has to be film. It's done at a hot temperature. But again, Sarah said, get one of those, those baths that they use for cooking, Sue's baths, and you just heat that up to the temperature you want and put all your chemicals in that so they stay at a higher temperature. But that's one of the trickier things. And there's bleach and stuff. Black and white is a little less toxic. And now obviously there's ways of doing it that aren't toxic at all. Use, caffeinol printing instead of the normal developer and so on. So yes, I do my color developing.
A lot of people are interested if you would do an online chlorophyll printing workshop.
Well, I'll ask my new friends there at the London Alternative Photography Collective if they want to host me. That would
That would be amazing.
Workshops and things like that do happen a lot. So if people just want to keep an eye out, and yeah, maybe Dianne.
Yeah, I did post a link with so you can follow the LAPC online and on Instagram as well.
Yeah, I can probably do something too myself, but it is fun. I mean, I love collaborating. I mean, this is the nice thing about, the three other women that I do work with, and doing an event like this is meeting people who are interested in similar things and sharing. I had friends in the past who said, why do you tell everybody how you do everything? And I went, if someone can do better than me, then, but if it's just the technique, it's more than just the technique, right? It's what you decide to do with it. So that's why I've never.
It is always more than the technique.
Yeah.
So there's questions about process, and I'll just try to put them together. Some people have asked, do you press your leaves before printing on them? And then what do you do after? Like, do you use a mordant to keep them from fraying or, just disintegrating, I guess?
Yeah, they're all, it's funny, a lot of changes start happening pretty quickly. So it's sometimes difficult because they're still so moist right after. You could see when I'm peeling the thing off, and when I say it's a piece of skin, to actually put it on a scanner, I probably wouldn't be able to get it off the scanner. So there's almost like this sweet time. It's usually about 24 hours, and you have to press them right away because they will just start getting all these wrinkles. And I use watercolor paper to press them because often other papers really wrinkle, and then that wrinkle goes into the leaf. So I use good watercolor. So I've just got like, you can buy the books, the blocks of watercolor paper, and it just slam them in between the pages of that. And it really absorbs it, and the watercolor paper doesn't warp. So yeah, I usually, but some of them I've been then, looking at them 6 months later and realizing, oh, they've got a really neat brown color, or the green's kind of disappearing, but now I'm the image that I have on it is working better with it like this. So yeah, I was just looking upstairs at one in the book I had up here, which was from last year. So there's still, you can kind of see it, but it's still pretty. This is one of the poetry ones my husband and I were working on. So it's really still, it's not stiff. This is the arum leaves. Some of the tree leaf ones are, but it's, definitely not green now. It's gone kind of a brown, but some of them stay green. And it's like, I think it's when I have them in the sun too long, and it's so, you've just got to be there watching it, because it could, clouds could come, so it doesn't, so you can't just say, yes, an hour. You're dealing with nature and the sun and clouds, and that's the cool part of it. I mean, I love all that. If someone is, if and that's the same with Pinhole. Sometimes I have people who take my workshops and they say, what's the perfect size pinhole to make the most perfect image? And I went, well, just buy a camera. Like the thing I like about Pinhole is like the kind of surprises, the irregular things that happen, the things where the universe participates with you in making the image. So I feel like when I'm doing these things, my relationship with nature and the environment is really is interesting. Except now I'm reading this book called The Light Eaters. Have you seen this one? And now I'm feeling bad about even picking plants, because now you talk.
I knew that book. Yeah.
Yeah, they're feeling everything. What do we do? Yeah.
So there's a lot of process questions, but I'll try to narrow it down. You mentioned that you waxed the paper at one point. How are you creating the stencils? I guess they're transparencies, or you're printing on the transparency.
No, the very first ones, because I didn't have that. So you need to get that clear transparency material. They used to use it with overhead projectors and so on. And certain kinds work in a printer. So I didn't have that, but I had read that if you oiled, or waxed just normal, printing paper, it gets more transparent. All of a sudden the oil makes it clear, and it actually made the paper clear enough that light, got through those sections, and I got an image. It wasn't quite as crisp as when there's a transparency on it. But it still worked. So yes, you can use, that was just normal printer paper that you would use, A4 or whatever. And so print an image on it. And then I think I used oil and like vegetable oil, and then just kept rubbing it so it wasn't super greasy on the leaf until it almost dried, but it was almost then like transparency, and it didn't.
Georgia asked, can you explain a bit about how you displayed and backlit the museum pieces? Are they in special frames? I guess they're light boxes, or
Yeah, they're light boxes. So they had them for other shows where they had backlit, photographs. And again, when I said like in bus stops and so on. And so those images I had blown up to the size of that on that same kind of material. The ones where I actually put the leaf in, I created kind of a little frame within the box. That was these LED strips. So that wasn't really high, like the light wasn't hot, and it was, how LED lights now just operate, you get a certain amount of brightness, but it's not using the same amount of energy, and it's a different kind of light. So these were kind of homemade ones, just built into the back, and then had the leaf. I just put little dabs of glue on it. They still can't. Oh no, I had it actually glued onto a piece of paper and then in the light box, and then the light came through. Yeah, because I wanted to be able to save the images afterwards. And yeah, it worked. And I was really amazed that it was a couple months, the exhibition, and they had the on timers, but they were on 12 hours a day. Like they would go on in the morning and not off at night. So, they held up pretty good with artificial light. I was really surprised.
Yeah. Somebody's asked, have you tried printing on seaweed?
No, no. Yeah, that's interesting. I know people have tried seaweed for doing anthotypes and so on. But yeah, I've never had the seaweed that I keep coming in contact with is, small grasses, not big enough leaves to do something on. That would be interesting because I'm wondering see the seaweed, so the light that seaweed gets from the sun because it comes through waters is different, but it's still photosynthesis. So, but it's a different wavelength. I don't know. That'd be cool. Now you got me interested. Go try it. Whoever asked that question, and send me an email.
We just have time for a couple more. Tessa asked, do you photocopy the images to be used as stencil onto plastic film before placing them for
Yes.
exposure to the, yeah, we
Yeah.
do.
So it's what I was saying, you can buy special transparency.
Yeah.
It's again, it's hard to find that stuff because even
Yeah.
people don't use overhead projectors anymore. And that transparency stuff is actually expensive. It's crazy. It's like $1 a sheet. But I go through a lot of it because sometimes I'm using bigger images and so on. But you can get packages of it. So yeah, it's almost like not every craft store will have it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, lots of people have, I think you really do. Sorry, was that you, Martha?
yeah, so I was saying you find it at like stationery stores. That's where you'd go buy it.
Yeah.
Going back to the pinhole, the multiple holes in the cardboard camera. How many holes?
Was in that one? Oh man.
Yeah.
It, I think the one probably had, I was going to count them because I sent that image as a birthday card to an astronomer friend who just turned 60. And I said, I didn't mean the candles to represent, candles on a cake. And he said, I think they're pretty close to being what my birthday. So there's at least 100. Those were big. I used, this was at the Banff Center. And they were lithograph plates that weren't being used anymore. So it was pretty heavy duty metal. And I ended up sanding like a screwdriver, like take that off into a point. But you have to then sand the other side, which is, the metal, because you don't want that burr because it affects the way the images. It would be, blurry. So you had to actually have all the holes. And the one thing with the candle thing is that I actually took a star chart of the Milky Way. If the star appears bright, I made a big hole. If a star on the chart was not as bright, I made a small hole. So I tried to make the holes that related to the star's brightness. So when I made that image, you saw different candles, and because each hole photographed that candle separately, they're each a little bit different view. Like it's kind of like those ones, how they say that insects with multiple, with eyes see things, like there's a whole kaleidoscope of images that their brain is able to put together into this, pretty accurate image of the world. I feel like those images are almost like that, in that way, because each one is completely different. It's really neat to walk, when I build those rooms that you can walk into. It's kind of cool to experience it. And people, they just they do not know how light works, and they don't know how your eyes work. It's really interesting how most people don't know how that, it's kind of nice to present something like that and have people experience it.
Yeah, and like everything else, you start thinking about what you can see and sight when you start losing it. I started losing it very early on, so
Yeah.
but thank you, Diane. That was excellent, and thank you,
Yeah.
Martha. It was such a good hour plus to spend online. And if you ever want to do a workshop, I'm sure you'll have hundreds of takers for that.
All
So
right. Well, I think I had on there my website and my
yeah,
Instagram, so people please contact me. I love hearing from you. I love seeing what people do. If you have questions, and yeah, you've given me an idea. Let's do an online thing. We better if we wait for the summer and we have leaves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and light.
yeah, and light. So, but it's a good idea. I'll start working on it now. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Guys, it was great, and it was nice meeting all of you out there who I cannot see.
No, neither can I.
I'm sure you're all wonderful.
Yeah. Good night. Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.